Hey everyone, welcome to the video. We're going to recap week 10 of the NFL season on Draftkings. We're going to go over the main lineup I used for single entry GBPs and cash games because I like to be transparent every single week, win or lose. Fortunately, it was a very good week for me this week. Then we're going to go over one of the winning lineups that was in my contest, my cash game rankings. Then we're going to look ahead at week 11 of the NFL season, just go over some first initial thoughts or reactions on the slate based on pricing, the matchups, and whatnot. Then we can build a first look lineup together. Now it's just a first look lineup, so never just take it with a grain of salt because I've not had time to just go in-depth research on the entire slate yet. That'll be coming out like on Thursday. But it's just first initial reactions, so we're just going to go with the flow, and we'll see what happens. Anyway, before we continue, if you could leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Really helps me out. Really appreciate it. You can also follow me on Twitter, at ChrisPennell16. And my spreadsheets I build every single week for the NFL season or the NBA season as well. I do that every single night. That's why I'm doing this video now, because I got to get ready for 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock, because that's the busiest time for NBA. You guys know how much news comes out if you play it. But yeah, links on the description below for my Patreon. I do projections, my cash rankings that I do right here. This is the most generic part of the cheat sheet. Everything else has a bunch of stats on it, projections, rankings, all that good stuff. So in my Slack chat as well, my cheat sheet, links in the description below for my Patreon. And let's get right into the video. So let's just go over my cash game rankings first. So I had Lamar Jackson as my numero uno. I don't usually I don't typically like to spend all the way up for quarterbacks, but I felt like Lamar Jackson was in such a good spot this week versus Cincinnati. They suck versus the run. Lamar Jackson's the best running quarterback I've ever seen. I mean, him and Michael Vick, it's just insane. And he had a great game. He had 33 fantasy points. He was the second highest scoring quarterback on the slate. I know he was expensive, but 33 points, he hit value. I mean, for sure, I was very happy with it. And he was actually behind Daniel Jones, which is crazy. I actually did like Daniel Jones a little bit. I know someone commented, favorite mid-range quarterback. I did say Daniel Jones, but he was not in my cash ranking, so I can't take too much credit. But Lamar Jackson, he only completed 15 passes, and he still got 33 fantasy points. That's the thing I love about this guy. I mean, his rushing upside's insane. 15 attempts, 17 attempts, 15 completions, 223 yards, 3 touchdowns. Had that video game rushing touchdown where he hit the B button after he did the little juke, and he hit the B button, and that was awesome. What was that, 45 yards, I think? Maybe a little bit more. It was great. 7 carries, 65 yards, and a touchdown. Unfortunately, I believe the defense had 2 touchdowns, so it pretty much knocked Lamar Jackson out of the game for the fourth quarter, pretty much. But basically in 3 quarters, 33 fantasy points. We'll take that. If the game was even close to being competitive, he could have had 40 some points. I mean, Lamar Jackson, he smashed. So you were happy if you played Lamar Jackson. Jameis Winston, he was okay. 23 points. He had the fire symbol right beside him, so I guess he was more than okay. But I expected a little bit more. He only had 1 passing touchdown, but he still threw the ball 48 times, 30 completions, 1 touchdown, which, that's why he only had 23 points. I'd expect Jameis Winston, if he's going to throw for 358 yards, probably 2 or 3 touchdowns. He did turn the ball over twice. Had 40 rushing yards, though, which was pretty nice. He doesn't have wheels, but he can rush the ball. But 40 yards is pretty good. 23 fantasy points, yeah, not too bad versus Arizona. Kyler Murray, he did very well. 30 fantasy points. Like I said, that was one of my favorite games of the week, and there was a lot of fantasy points scored in this game. 6,500. He threw the ball 44 times, 27 completions, 324 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. 3 for 38 on the ground, 30 fantasy points. Yeah, pretty good for Kyler Murray. I felt like quarterbacks was one of my strong points this week. Ryan Tannehill, he just continues to have good games at extremely cheap prices. I mean, the guy's dirt cheap every single week. He was 5,100. Like, 4th week in a row, he's hit value. Had 19 fantasy points, only completed 13 passes, only had 181 yards. But he still had 2 passing touchdowns, 3 for 37 on the ground, did have a fumble. But, 19 fantasy points, we will take that. It was a really high-scoring game, 35-32. Yeah, pretty good game for Ryan Tannehill given his price, so I didn't mind that. Then Drew Brees, I had 5th, and he did not have a good game whatsoever. He ended up with 11 fantasy points, which is insane versus Atlanta. We know Atlanta, we love to use quarterbacks against, which I'm going to do again this week as of right now. But yeah, this was an ugly game for the Saints. No touchdowns here, no rushing stats. I mean, it's Drew Brees, you're not really going to expect any rushing stats anyway, but 45 passing attempts, completed 32 of them for only 287 yards. Gross game from Drew Brees. He should bounce back this week versus Tampa Bay, but he's just very expensive. His price went up. And 11 fantasy points last week. Yeah, that sucked. Running backs, Christian McCaffrey. I was plugging him in every single day of the week. I had no plans of coming off of Christian McCaffrey, no matter the price. Versus Green Bay, he had a good game. 29 fantasy points. I will say He really didn't pay off his price tag too much because at 10,500 I wanted over 30 points. He was close, but he could have had 2 touchdowns. He was 20 for 108 on the ground, had 6 catches for 33 yards, 7 targets. I swear, though, on the last play of the game, he got into the end zone. I don't know. It was a touchdown. I was pretty sure he was in, so he could have had an even bigger game, 36 fantasy points. I mean, maybe the game goes into overtime. And Kyle Allen also missed him on an out route on the goal line, and he could have caught the touchdown there, but I forget if he underthrew it or overthrew it. But either way, Christian McCaffrey had his guy beat. So, unfortunately, he could have had in the mid-30s, but, 29 points. I mean, that's pretty much what you get from Christian McCaffrey with upside of more every single week. So, yeah, CMC, he was okay. David Montgomery, he busted his chalk this week. It didn't really matter that he busted because I believe he was 80% owned in cash games. And the percentages you're seeing below here is on a GPP, and he was 71% in my GPP. So basically, I didn't care what he did this week. Yeah, obviously, it would have been nice if he went off just because 29% of the field faded him. But it didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. If you were playing cash games, everyone played him. But yeah, he only had, 6 fantasy points. Didn't catch a ball, I don't believe. No. Yeah, 17 times 60 yards versus Detroit. That sucked. That's what I get for trusting David Montgomery, I guess. But Ronald Jones, I came up a lot on him during the week. So I originally had Marlon Mack as my number 2. And then I got lower on him throughout the week, which actually ended up being a very profitable choice for me. So Ronald Jones, I bumped him up to number 3 because I wanted to spend up for... So originally, earlier in the week, I wasn't going to pay up for McCaffrey and Michael Thomas. Then later on in the week, I'm like, yeah, okay, I should probably get these 2 guys in because they were going to be pretty high owned. Well, Michael Thomas ended up being, I believe, 80% owned in cash games. He was 70% in GPPs. Probably not big field GPPs, but I don't play big field GPPs. I just play the single entries. Single entries. So I figured he'd be high owned, so I just plugged both those guys in. And I couldn't go double expensive at running back. Not that Marlon Mack was overly expensive, but Ronald Jones at 4,300, it was a good matchup versus Arizona. And points were going to be scored in that game. I figured Ronald Jones could probably get into the end zone, get me double-digit points, and he had a pretty good game. He ended up scoring 23 fantasy points. He was like the 6th highest scoring running back on the slate. Ended up getting 11 carries, 29 yards. That sucks. Did get into the end zone, but he was really big in the passing game, and he outdid his whole season in one game in the passing game this week. He had 8 receptions on 8 targets, 77 yards. Really helped boost his floor, and he was a fantastic play at 4,300, one of the best values on the slate for running backs. So yeah, that was a pretty good play there. Marlon Mack, he disappointed me quite a bit. I really believed in him this week. I figured the Colts, no matter who the quarterback was, would be able to get a lead on Miami, and that just wasn't the case. They fell behind early, and 19 carries, I shouldn't say only, that's pretty good, 19 carries. Only had 74 yards, though, did not get into the end zone, 1 catch for 8 yards. Game script didn't go the way I thought it would, and they even lost the game. So, yeah, Marlon Mack did not work out. He got that nice big snowflake beside his name. I mean, unfortunately, I got lower on him throughout the week, but I know he was in my court plays video, and I really did believe in him this week. It just didn't work out. And then Damian Williams. I originally had Nick Chubb / Devin Singletary here, but with LaShawn McCoy being a healthy and active, I didn't plug in Damian Williams myself. I put him in at the 5th spot just because he was so cheap. And he's going to be the starting running back, and he was fine. 14.9 fantasy points, 19 carries, 77 yards, 5 catches, 32 yards. Pretty much your typical Damian Williams game when he doesn't score a touchdown. So he was okay. He was pretty high owned. I believe he was 40% owned in my contest. So, yeah, he was chalky for good reason, though. On to wide receivers. Michael Thomas, he was pretty much the lock of the week at wide receiver, him and Christian Kirk. But yeah, Michael Thomas, he had a fantastic game. He was the 5th highest scoring wide receiver on the slate in 8,300. He had 14 targets, 13 catches, 152 yards. Like I said, no one on Atlanta is going to be able to stop the guy. Unfortunately, he didn't get into the end zone. I guess it wouldn't have really mattered anyway. Everyone played him. But yeah, 31 fantasy points, you'll take that every single week. Now, we have a big question with Michael Thomas this week because he is very, very expensive, but we'll get into that soon. Chris Godwin, I just loved that whole game, so I figured, I like Chris Godwin quite a bit in slot here. Arizona sucks versus slot receivers. He didn't do much. I don't remember. He had 13 fantasy points. He had the snowflake. He had 12 targets, which, I'll take 12 targets from Chris Godwin every single week, especially versus Arizona. If you were going to tell me Chris Godwin got 12 targets versus Arizona in the slot, I would imagine he's probably like a top 5 scoring wide receiver this week. Unfortunately, he only had 74 yards for 13.4 fantasy points, so he was disappointing, but I do like him quite a bit again this week. Christian Kirk, I pretty much said he's the easiest play at wide receiver this week. Him and Michael, he was easier than Michael Thomas was because he was so cheap, and it was a mispricing versus a terrible Tampa Bay defense that gets killed by wide receivers. I didn't understand the price there. I mean, I know he was coming off a game versus San Francisco, but still, there was no reason he should have been that cheap. He was number one target for Kyler Murray, and he balled out. He was the highest scoring wide receiver of the week. 40 fantasy points, 10 targets, 6 catches, 138 yards, 3 touchdowns. The guy balled out. He was very highly owned, and if you didn't have him, you weren't winning in GPP. So Christian Kirk, he did awesome. Jamison Crowder, I was on him pretty earlier in the week. Yeah, I think he was in my first look video. Christian Kirk, I liked him a lot. I mean, not Christian Kirk, Jamison Crowder, and he had a great matchup versus the Giants, and he had a pretty good game. He set the world on fire, but he had 19 fantasy points, 5 catches on 6 targets, 81 yards, and a touchdown. It was a great matchup in the slot versus New York, who just continues to get shredded by slot receivers. So Jamison Crowder had a pretty good game for his price tag. Devontae Adams, James Bradbury was out, and I just felt like Devontae Adams, for who he is, and Aaron Rodgers' number 1 receiver, he felt a little bit too cheap. I believe he was at 6,900. Yeah, that's just a little bit too cheap for Devontae Adams. I mean, he didn't absolutely murder his price tag, but 21 fantasy points, we'll take that. He had 118 yards on 10 targets and 7 catches, 21 fantasy points. Not too bad. As for the value guys, I felt like I did pretty good in the value guys. A.J. Brown did not do much at all. I don't exactly remember what he ended up with. I want to say it was around 4 points. I'm scrolling through the DK Live thing right now. 2.7 points actually. So he only had 1 catch for 17 yards, 4 targets. Pretty disappointing, but I mean, he was cheap, so hopefully he didn't absolutely murder you. Curtis Samuel, he continues to have some pretty good games. I actually like him a lot this week. He ended up with 13 fantasy points. Not like he did great, but he got into the end zone. 8 targets, 4 catches, 35 yards, and a touchdown. Pretty good for Curtis Samuel. And I have interest in him again. He was only 4,600. And Adam Humphries, so he was free on DraftKings. He was 3,500, and it was a decent matchup versus Kansas City. I figured Tennessee would have to throw the ball a lot because they'd be trailing. Wasn't really the case, and he was goosing the whole game. And then at the very end, he catches a touchdown on his lone target for 23 yards and a touchdown, kind of up the middle. And I don't know, he just got underneath, and Kansas City really didn't do anything. So he ended up working out. He was in my main lineup. I was pretty happy about it. So I was glad I didn't get the goose there. So he worked out at 3,500. As for the tight ends, Mike Gesicki, I figured he was an easy plug and play this week. He was dirt cheap. He's got upside. It's a good matchup. Didn't really do much. He only scored, I believe, 4.8 points, had 3 catches on 6 targets. The 6 targets were nice, but he did fumble, 28 yards. I mean, it was whatever. He was 3,100. Jack Doyle had another good game. He got into the end zone. Ended up scoring 13.4 fantasy points, 44 yards, not 44 catches. That'd be cool, but pretty cool. But had a touchdown, 4 targets, 44 yards on 3 receptions, so he was fine. And Rhett Ellison, I believe he had 7 fantasy points 7.2 fantasy points. He was 2,500. He was dirt cheap. No Evan Ingram. He made some sense. Travis Kelce had a good game. He had a touchdown called back because I believe Tyreek Hill had offensive interference. I think that's what it was. But 20 fantasy points. He was missing Patrick Mahomes. Ended up working out. Could have had an even bigger game. Caught that touchdown on the shovel pass. So 7 for 75. Typical Travis Kelce game. And then O.J. Howard, he finally got into the end zone. Tight ends versus Arizona never fails. Even O.J. Howard, it was a cure for O.J. Howard. So if he can do it, that means anybody can do it. I believe he had 14.7 fantasy points. He was one of the best tight end plays on the slate. 7 targets, 4 catches, 47 yards. Nice to see him get involved. That was pretty good. As for the defenses, who cares? I had the Browns, Bears, Colts, Ravens. I believe the Ravens did good. I think the Bears did okay. I think the Ravens had, they have 2 touchdowns? Yeah, 2 touchdowns, 24 fantasy points. Pretty darn good for them. The Browns sucked. They got 2 fantasy points. I guess that's what I get for being a homer. They were pretty chalky, though. Colts defense had 8. Bears had 8. They were going up against Jeff Driscoll, so, I mean, yeah. But, yeah, that was it for the defenses. And then as for my main lineup, it was actually the lineup I ended up using the lineup that I used in the lineup building video. So I don't always do that, but it ended up working out. So I just went and rolled with it because I didn't want to change off of it. So I went with Lamar Jackson. He balled out. Christian McCaffrey, David Montgomery, Adam Humphries, Christian Kirk, Michael Thomas, Mike Gesicki, and Ronald Jones in the Browns defense, which was good for 180 fantasy points. And it was a pretty good week. It was actually, I think, my best week of the season. So it was a very nice week last week. It's always nice to do these videos coming off a better week. Kyler in the winning lineup in one of my contests. That's why I'm always saying I like these smaller contests. I'm not saying small dollar contests, but these smaller entry size contests. Like I play a lot of for the double ups, I just play whatever size, the single entries. But for GPPs, I like to stick in this like 45 to 100 some person range because the scores are much lower. You're playing with all the pros, but the thing is, none of these guys they're not gonna play these stupid dumb plays that 0.07% ownership that go nuts, and you have to have them to win. More than likely, these guys, random guys that score touchdowns, are not going to be on these guys' lineups. So you don't have to be super, super sneaky to win contests. I mean, this guy really wasn't sneaky whatsoever. These are all, pretty decent, obvious plays. I'm not going to say they're all obvious, but, plays you were probably thinking about playing. You're not thinking about some of these guys that are playing. I mean, you didn't even have to have you didn't even have to have Slayton in this one. I know Slayton went off at lower ownership. So, and the winning lineup in this contest, it was Kyler Murray, Derrick Henry, David Montgomery, Marquise Brown, Devontae Parker, Michael Thomas, Travis Kelce, Ronald Jones, and the Steelers defense. And I believe that only scored 203 points. And 203 points, it took down the GPP there. And I'm just saying, if you guys play a whole bunch of these, smaller sized GPPs, and you're more than likely going to be much more profitable, because if you're going into the Millie Maker and you're scoring 3 points, you're probably not doing much damage whatsoever. But, I mean, you can win much more ROI on these smaller single entry contests. So that's just my, advice to you guys. It's what I do. It's been profitable. And I'm only telling you guys what to do, stuff I do. I don't play the Millie Maker. Maybe if you get extremely, extremely lucky, you'll hit the Millie one day. I mean, chances are you're not going to. So if you only have to beat 50 people instead of like 300,000 people, I'm going to take my chances in the 50 people, and you can just play in multiple of these contests, and it should be more profitable over time than it is chasing the Millie Maker or the play action that's like, a couple 100,000 people. So anyway, that's my spiel on that. That's enough of the Week 10 recap. Let's get into Week 11 and build a lineup together and just go over some first initial thoughts. And let me make this smaller, actually. Then let me make sure you guys can see the names pop up. Okay, I think we're good to go. Let me just make sure. And let me get a drink. I'm drinking a bubbly. I don't know if you guys drink bubblies, but they suck. I don't like them at all, but it's what's in my fridge. They don't taste like, it's like a peach bubbly, and it doesn't taste like peach whatsoever. It tastes awful, but I didn't have any water down here. So anyway, let's get into this slate. So there's a lot of good options, and I got to say DraftKings is making it tough this week because everyone's priced to the moon. Michael Thomas is 9,900, McCaffrey's 10,500, Lamar Jackson's 7,700. We definitely can't play Lamar Jackson, Christian McCaffrey, and Michael Thomas again. So it's going to be rough. It's not going to be rough, but it's not. We can't just spend up for all the guys we want to unless some extra value pops up. But there's not a ton of it this week. So yeah, Lamar Jackson versus Houston, that's fine. Drew Brees should have a pretty big bounce back game versus Tampa Bay. Deshaun Watson's Deshaun Watson, but I can't afford top dollar quarterback this week, so I'm looking to go all the way down here to Kyle Allen. It actually surprised me that he was this cheap because I always like to scroll down and see what quarterbacks are cheap. And Kyle Allen, I actually skipped over him because I was like, okay, well, there's no cheap quarterbacks. Carson Wentz kind of stood out for a second, but then I'm like, okay, he's playing New England. So then I'm looking and I'm like, well, shoot, maybe I had to spend up for a quarterback and sacrifice a running back. But then I scroll down again and I'm like, wait, who's playing Atlanta? And then I saw Kyle Allen. I'm like, oh, he's only 5,300. So I think that's a little bit of a mispricing here. I mean, he's been fine. He's not setting the world on fire, but 18, 15 versus San Francisco, it's a tough matchup. He had 3, but then he had 17, 11, tougher matchup versus Jacksonville, 6, but 25 in a good matchup versus Arizona. Now we get a good matchup versus Atlanta. They're allowing the 5th most points per game to quarterbacks. I believe 23.7 points allowed per game. If he can get me 18 to 20 points, and then I can get my higher end wide receivers and running backs, I think I don't think I'll take it. I will take it, and I think he can get the job done. And Vegas really likes this game, and as I do too. Carolina's coming at 6-point favorites at home versus Atlanta. We have a 15.5 point total. So the Panthers do have a pretty big implied total here. And I'd rather play McCaffrey, but I gotta say McCaffrey is. I'm always team McCaffrey. You can play McCaffrey, you can fit him in, but there's just no other value quarterbacks, and the value quarterback this week happens to be Kyle Allen, and I'm not so sure if I want to play the two together. We'll see throughout the week. I might change my mind, but I'm liking Kyle Allen at this price tag. He should have a decent game versus Atlanta. I think he can get you over 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, and we'll take that at this price tag. I think he can have a Ryan Tannehill game, and Ryan Tannehill's been fine, so 5,300, I will take that. I think he's going to be fine. I can expect him to. I think he'll probably have some ownership this week, 5,300, but I don't mind that, especially for cash games. I think he offers us a somewhat safe floor versus Atlanta. They're just getting killed by quarterbacks. As for the running backs, like I said, I'm not so sure if I want to play McCaffrey and Kyle Allen together this week because I'm also going to want to probably use one of his wide receivers. So I think a nice logical choice here would be Zeke. He's coming off a bad game versus the Minnesota Vikings, but they're a tougher run defense, but we're getting volume out of Zeke. He's always going to get his volume. He's usually somewhat involved in the passing game. The past 2 weeks haven't been pretty in that department, but other than that, 2-2-3, 7-3, 6-7, 0-2. He should be involved in the passing game more likely than not. And he gets you over 20 rushing attempts pretty much per game. I mean, especially the past since week 6, 28, 22, 23, 20. It's a great matchup versus Detroit. They're giving up the second most points per game to running backs at 32 points per game. He's the main running back here. He's going to get all the work he can get. He should be able to get you 25 plus touches with upside of 30. I imagine Dallas should win this game, especially if Matthew Stafford's out. They should be able to get to a lead and just grind it out with Zeke here. And I mean, he's had big games. I mean, the past 2 games have not been great, but he's gotten over 100 yards 3 games in a row, week 6 to week 9, and 29-29. I mean, I think we can see a game closer to that instead of these teen numbers that we've been seeing. So I think we get over 20 points here. He's $9K, but he's also $1,500 cheaper than Christian McCaffrey, and he's got similar upside. Obviously, if they were the same price, I'm taking Christian McCaffrey every single day, but I'm struggling to find value on this slate, so I'm going to take the $1,500 cheaper option with Zeke here at $9K, and I think he can have a pretty good game versus the Lions. I mean, they're just getting destroyed on the ground. Last week versus Montgomery, they did not, but it's David Montgomery, and Zeke's obviously a much better running back than he is, so we're going to plug him in for right now. Maybe we can get up to McCaffrey later in the week, but I'm not sure if I want to play Kyle Allen and McCaffrey together. I know CMC catches the ball a ton, but I just don't know if it's the greatest correlation play. We'll see, though. Obviously, I like Christian McCaffrey. Just because he's not in this lineup doesn't mean I don't like him. So as for an RB2, you guys know I'm a big Josh Jacobs fan. The guy's really good. I mean, I think I'm going to plug him in at 6,900 versus Cincinnati. I mean, Cincinnati just sucks versus running backs. So we're just taking the matchups here and the volume. And, both him and Zeke get a ton of volume. And Cincinnati, they're the 3rd worst team versus running backs this year, allowing 29.8 fantasy points per game, which is 3rd most in the NFL. And he's getting volume. 16 attempts last week, 28 the week before, 15, 21, 26, 17, then 10, 12, 23, but they finally started using him after week 4 like they should be. And he's been fine. 19, 27, 10, 19, 32, 12, 4, 9, 24. Really only had one bad game, and that's versus Minnesota, which, we just saw Zeke have a pretty bad game versus Minnesota, so I'll give him a pass there. And he also had 5 targets last week, which was really encouraging to see for 30 yards. If we can continue to see targets like that, 6,900, I think it's a steal for Josh Jacobs. Oakland offensive line in terms of run blocking is pretty good, and they should be able to open holes versus Cincinnati. Teams continually to have good games versus them, so 6,900, I would take that. It should be able to get you over 20 touches. The Raiders should win this game. They should have a lead, and they're playing at home. So Josh Jacobs, he makes sense, and he's really good on PFF, and their ratings. He's one of the best elusive running backs in terms of their elusive ratings. He breaks a lot of tackles. I believe he's 2nd in the league in broken tackles, so Josh Jacobs, I think he makes a ton of sense this week at 6,900. Doesn't break the bank either, and I feel like he should be able to get into the end zone once or twice, and he should be able to get you over 100 total yards here. So Josh Jacobs does make sense to me. As for the wide receivers, it's tough. It's really, really tough because I want to play Michael Thomas. I think he can get you over 40 fantasy points in this game. It would not surprise me at all. The problem is he's 9,900. Now, I think the question is this week, do you want to make Michael Thomas the staple of your lineup, or do you want to make someone like McCaffrey or Zeke the staple of your lineup? And when it comes to wide receivers and running backs, I tend to go with the running backs because you get guaranteed volume, but you also get guaranteed volume from Michael Thomas. I mean, he leads the league in targets, target share, whatever you name it. If there's a wide receiver stat, he's more than likely first. And the guy does not have bad games, and he's been more consistent than Zeke, I'll tell you that, which sounds surprising, wide receiver, but he's been more consistent. He's pretty much the most consistent player in the league, him and McCaffrey, but McCaffrey also had a single-digit game, and Michael Thomas has not had a single-digit game. 31, 30, 25, 16, 44, versus Tampa Bay with Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback. Now he's got Drew Brees back. I don't see how Michael Thomas doesn't smash here. 18, 16, 18, 25. The guy's awesome. Tampa Bay is giving up the most points per game to wide receivers this season at, 50.6 points per game. We saw Christian Kirk absolutely demolish these guys. I don't know what I want to do yet. As of right now, I think I'm going to pay up for Zeke. But I think Michael Thomas is an extremely good GPP play. I don't know how high owned he's going to be in cash yet. Obviously, we don't have ownership projections out right now. But I think the toughest question of the week is, do you want to go Zeke or McCaffrey, or do you want to go Michael Thomas? And I think they're all fine plays. It's just I have a hard time paying $10K for a wide receiver. Because, things can always go more wrong for wide receivers than it can running backs. So I'm going to pass on Michael Thomas just for this lineup. But let's go down a little bit. We got Chris Godwin at 7,300, and I like him quite a bit. Last time versus New Orleans. New Orleans is a tough pass defense because Marshawn Lattimore. Now, he's injured, and either way, even if Marshawn Lattimore was playing, I'd still like Chris Godwin because he'd be in the slot. And New Orleans is one of the worst teams in the league versus slot receivers. So Marshawn Lattimore, he did get hurt. He's considered week to week, so let's just assume he doesn't play right now. P.J. Williams will go to the outside, and then, the Saints are going to throw whatever scrub they have at Chris Godwin. He should be able to eat in this matchup. Last time versus New Orleans, he scored 34 fantasy points. This game should be pretty good for fantasy purposes. It's got a 51.5 point team Vegas total, which is highest on the slate. And Tampa Bay does come in at 5-point dogs. And New Orleans has one of the best run defenses in the NFL. So I assume Jameis Winston's going to pass the ball quite a bit. Chris Godwin should have a pretty big game here. I mean, he hasn't been great the past few weeks, especially for his price, 10, 13, 13. Would have liked for his price to come down a little bit, but I guess DraftKings isn't stupid, so they know it's a pretty good matchup in the slot versus New Orleans. So Chris Godwin, as of right now, we can plug him in. And then after this, it gets ugly quick because I don't love any of the receivers this week. I like Michael Thomas, I like Mike Evans, I like Chris Godwin. And I should say, if you want to play Mike Evans over Chris Godwin, that's fine too, especially if Marshawn Lattimore doesn't play. If Marshawn Lattimore doesn't play, just play Chris Godwin. But if Lattimore doesn't play, Mike Evans is just fine too. He's $1,000 more expensive, so it doesn't really matter too much for me. But so now at this point, I'm probably going to pair Kyle Allen up with one of his wide receivers. DJ Moore's been fantastic, but there is a cheaper option here. But yeah, I mean, past few games, he's been good. 24, 28, 15, 15, 7, 13, 17, 13. Obviously, some of those games with Cam Newton. But he's been pretty good this year. He's only 5,900, so I like DJ Moore, but I can't afford him in this lineup. So let's just go with Curtis Samuel at 5,300. He's got upside too. Hit 13 points last week, 16 the week before, 8, 23, 7, 6, 16, 14, 6. He's been pretty good this year. He sees targets, 8 targets, 6, 11, 6, 6, 7, 7, 7, 13. He's going to be heavily involved in this offense. It's a great matchup versus Atlanta. They're giving up 41 points per game to wide receivers. It's pretty much just the Curtis Samuel and DJ Moore show here, so it's a pretty concentrated offense. It's CMC, it's DJ Moore, it's Curtis Samuel. You know they're going to get the ball. So Curtis Samuel 5,300, I think is a pretty good pairing with Kyle Allen this week, so we're going to plug him in there. And now we only have 4K left per position, and it gets ugly pretty quick. So before we fill in the wide receiver 3 spot, that's kind of what I've been doing recently. I've been kind of just filling out the wide receiver 3 spot at the end and seeing who fits. And it worked out last week with Humphries, so let's just go to tight end right now. And George Kittle, I don't know if he's going to play. If he does, he's the top tight end on the slate. But as of right now, I don't know if he's going to play versus Arizona. Mark Andrews, he had a great week last week versus Cincinnati. Tougher matchup versus Houston. Austin Hooper should miss some time, I believe. And Darren Waller versus Cincy. Yeah, that's a fine play. Can't really afford him, though. But Jared Cook, he stands out. He's going up against Tampa Bay. And we know Tampa Bay sucks versus tight ends. And I want a piece of this New Orleans offense. They're going to score a bunch of points. I mean, they have one of the highest implied team totals of the slate, if not the highest. I think they're up there with Carolina. So I want a piece of it. I would not feel comfortable not having a piece of this offense going into the week. So Jared Cook, 4,400. He had a pretty good game last week versus Atlanta. He had 10 targets, which was really encouraging to see. 74 yards, 6 catches, 13 fantasy points. Now he goes up against Tampa Bay, who is the second worst team in the NFL versus tight ends, only behind Arizona. They're giving up 18.8 points per game to tight ends. So it's a very readable matchup for Jared Cook. And, I mean, if he gets me over 5 targets, I don't think he's going to get 10 again. But if he can get me over 5 targets, I will take that. And I think he's fine play. He should be able to get into the end zone. Tight ends just routinely smash versus them. Arizona didn't last week. It didn't really count because it's Arizona. But They don't really use their tight end much anyway. So Jared Cook at 4,400, I think that's fine. As for the flex spot, I think an option a lot of people are going to go to is, so Ito Smith's on the IR. Devontae Freeman, he's going to miss some time. So we're probably looking at playing Brian Hill, which I actually forget his price tag. Yeah, 4,800. So he's going up against Carolina, and he saw 20 carries last week. Now, was he good with them? No. He had 61 yards. But it's a really tough matchup versus New Orleans. They were winning the game, though, so it was a positive game script, but New Orleans was a tough run defense. Had 2 targets, had 14 fantasy points, which wasn't too bad to get into the end zone, but he's got a pretty good matchup versus Carolina. They are giving up, if I remember correctly, so they're actually giving up the 5th most points per game to running backs, which is 29.6 points per game. He's pretty much going to be the only running back here. He should have a decent game versus them. We've seen running backs have some pretty good games versus the Panthers. Tevin Coleman just did recently, as did Aaron Jones, and as did Jamal Williams. He didn't really have a good game, but Aaron Jones did. But I think he's going to be fine. 4,800, he's cheap. He should get over 20 touches. It's a high-scoring game. Hopefully he gets into the end zone at 4,800. I think he makes sense. He'll probably have some ownership this week as the cheap running back, but he allows us to fit in some other studs like Zeke, Jacobs, maybe Thomas. We'll see. But Brian Hill, I think he makes some sense this week. And now we have 3,500 left per position. So at this point, I'm going to plug in my defense, and I'm not totally sure what I wanted to go with. I usually like punting, but I don't know how I feel about the Cardinals versus San Francisco. If we go with the Cardinals, we got 5,500 left. I know Calvin Ridley's 5,500. But I don't love the Cardinals defense here, so I think we could go with the Redskins. They're 2,800 versus the Jets, and I believe this is 37.5 point team Vegas total over under. So this is actually the lowest total on the slate. Washington is favored here by 1.5 points. They're going up against Sam Darnold. Turnovers can be had here. The Redskins defense hasn't been absolutely awful this season, so if you plug them in, you get 4,200 left. And I got to be honest, I don't like any of these guys at 4,200, so hopefully there's some other things that can change throughout the week, because obviously there should be, but so we have guys like Auden Tate, Danny Amendola, Philip Dorsett. Now Dorsett might be interesting if Mohamed Sanu wasn't there, but he is, so unfortunately that's probably not viable. LBC Johnson, if Adam Thielen misses the game, but he really didn't. He still had 4 targets last week. It's a tough matchup versus Denver, though, but he's pretty cheap. But you're banking on Adam Thielen missing the game. Chester Rogers, it's gross. Ted Ginn, it's a good matchup. I'm not sure if I want to double up on Ginn and Jared Cook, but you pretty much need a big play from this guy. He's going to get his few targets, but if he doesn't hit on a big play, you're probably not going to be happy with playing Ted Ginn. But it's definitely possible versus Tampa Bay. You guys saw Christian Kirk absolutely eat them alive. So at 4,100, I wouldn't hate that either. Deebo Samuel, if George Kittle misses the game, this actually might be a decent play here. He had 13 points versus Carolina. Obviously not great, but he had 7 targets last week versus Arizona. It was a good matchup. He had 8 points. If Kittle misses the game at 4K versus Arizona, might not be the worst play in the world, but hopefully some things changes so we can get up to at least someone else decent. So we'll see. But as of right now, I'm kind of liking the core of Kyle Allen, Zeke, Josh Jacobs, Chris Godwin, Curtis Samuel, whoever the heck you want to plug in wide receiver 3. I think Russell Gage, I don't even know what his, I think I saw him in the 3,500 range. Yeah, he's 3,300. So that gives us 900 left. Maybe we can upgrade a defense. Maybe we can get someone like the Vikings at 3,400 versus Denver. I don't know, something like that. I'm not totally sure. But as of right now, I think that's a solid core to work with. But obviously things will change throughout the week. This is just the first look video. So I think I'm going to leave you guys with that. I got some NBA stuff to do. It's 5:50. So I'm going to leave you guys with that. Hope you guys had a great Sunday main slate yesterday. Hope you guys won some money. And I wish you guys the best of luck tonight in the showdown slate. And I'll see you guys in the next video.